The time has come to put all of the other fret positions in place. We've got one slot in place, and we'd like to create a pattern of all the others. We'd like one slot at each of these points all the way down the neck. Now, that is actually going to be really straightforward to do, because in SOLIDWORKS, instead of patterning geometry, like patterning just these surfaces, we're able to actually pattern the design intent by patterning this feature that we put in. And what I mean by that is, when we did this feature, we had it start up here and go down until it hit the surface and then go a little bit further, right? And so what we can do is pattern that feature so that at each of these points it's going to go down until it hits the surface and then a little further. Rather than having flat bottoms on all of these things, we can have them follow this surface perfectly, which is really a powerful feature in SOLIDWORKS. But in order for that to work, there's a slight caveat here. We took a little shortcut earlier, and I'm going to show you what it is. When we did our cut extrude, we said go up, offset from surface, and we chose this face right here. Now that worked in this particular case. However, when we pattern it, it's going to be looking for what face it wants to trim each one of these. And this face may or may not have the same internal ID each time all the way down, because we've broken that face by doing this feature. So that's kind of a mind-bending concept. But basically what we have to do is use a surface other than this face to terminate this feature. That way, as we create this pattern, we're not messing up the face we're trying to use as we go. So instead of using this face, let's select that and clear it out. I'm going to go to my design tree. Turns out that we have a perfect surface right here already, which is that original surface extend that we created to create this, this extrude. So let's right-click on this and say show that surface body. And then we can click it in the viewport, and now we're going to go up to that surface and beyond it a little bit. Okay, so we can click OK, exit the sketch, and hide that body. And the result is identical. The difference is now we're going to be able to pattern this and it's going to work. Now, the other thing about this is when we do this pattern, we don't actually need all of these instances. Remember, we made a bunch of frets down here at the end that we don't need. So let's create a new sketch on the front plane. And I'm just going to grab, just to do this quickly, let's grab the point tool right here in our sketch tools and just create one point snapped to each fret position that we want to use. So I'm going to snap one of these points to each of these guys. So now I have a point at each one of the points where I want a fret position to occur, and just ignoring the ones where I don't. So I can exit here. And with that new sketch selected, I'm going to come up where it says linear pattern in features, drop that down and say sketch driven pattern. That's going to let me create a pattern of features at each of the points in this sketch. So let's start by selecting the feature that we want to pattern, which is our extruded cut right here. Fine. And then the one other thing we need to do is choose a reference point, right? So we're patterning from something to this first point. Well, let's click on that reference point and choose this point right down here. And now we're going to see that it's going to pattern these exactly where we want them all the way down. Now in the preview, it's not going to show you the whole thing. In the preview, it's going to look like these things are getting chopped off, like they're just coming straight on down. But watch what happens when we click OK. They actually go all the way out, because it's actually repeating that feature. It's not just duplicating geometry all the way down. It's taking that entire cut extrude, which happens to be, if you'll recall, 1 millimeter wider than the widest point on our fretboard. You remember that? Well, that's the reason we did that, was because as it works its way down, it's got a wide enough sketch to cut all the way through this guy. And so with that, our fretboard is basically finished. So all I have to do is run my mirror operation here. Let's choose my right-hand plane. And we want to, we don't want to mirror features, right? Right now it's mirroring our sketch pattern because that's the most recent thing we did. Let's mirror bodies, and we'll mirror that solid body. Click OK. So let's just zoom down to the bottom here, turn on our body delete, again, to get rid of all of those surfaces, those unwanted surfaces, and we're left with only exactly what we want here, just a nice clean fretboard ready to use in our assembly. So once our part is done, I'll just hit save. I like to make sure that all of the planes and sketches are hidden before I save it. That way they won't be in the way when we create our assembly later on. Okay, let's move on to the next part.